presentation from a different perspective and approach. So one question, I have like kind of two questions wrapped up into one, and I'm curious, since we're all here, how do you each approach, or what do you think of sort of pedagogy? And how does pedagogy work from an African-centered perspective in an environment like CIS? I appreciated, Adiba, how you mentioned, the majority of your scholarship is African-centered, and you had to seek that out. And I'm curious, like, how often do you even engage white Eurocentered scholarship? Ebade, you went through this detailed presentation of Aragundo, Wilbur, participatory. Why? And do you identify sort of epistemological bias when you start with a reference from a Western-centered, Euro-centered approach to understand sort of an African-centered approach of a worldview? And Arisika, you gave us your story. And two, sort of what is the experience of that? And what are we maybe missing when we privilege our stories? Or what are we gaining, I should say, too. I don't want to put a value on that quite much. So just kind of wanted to offer that, just sort of things that are meandering sort of in my essence, as sort of hearing all of you speak, and sort of the challenges I have in terms of navigating from an epistemological perspective my own scholarship, and then two, how do I interact with the pedagogy that is often privileging narratives that aren't our own.
So a couple of things. For me, as I mentioned in my remarks, I've always been African-centered. Everything I know about school has been initially through that perspective. And my concern now is, because there's such an attack on ethnic studies and cultural studies, that what little is remnants of it that's left is being aggressively attacked. Even in the place where it was founded at San Francisco State just a few weeks ago, students were protesting to retain what's left of it. And so for me, what's important is that, well, two things have happened. One, because that's my natural inclination, is towards culturally specific pedagogy. That's my natural inclination. What I've started to gain is an appreciation, most recently, for Western and Eurocentric perspectives. And my husband has been significant in me opening my mind to that even when you're reading them, there's something that you can learn. And that you can take what they have and you can take from it and build on it. And so it's sort of the reverse of what generally happens, where you would be situated in a Eurocentric Western pedagogy and then look over here and see what you can add. So I'm doing the reverse. I'm starting to look over there to see what I can add. So yeah, it's been a very interesting shift. And also what's happening and being in dialogue with contemporary scholars is the notion of culture. Culture is very central to how I move through the world. And so the idea of something that is very culturally specific to being multicultural, to cross-cultural. I have a book now called Transcultural, right? And so it's like, okay, so what does culture mean in now? And how do I, as someone who is very clearly Pan-African, African-centered, and all of these sort of things, how do I hold space for other voices in that? And so one of the things that I've been doing recently is working on putting together a presentation around the different voices within Africana studies, and holding and making space for voices that I don't necessarily resonate with, and being able to be in dialogue with the voices that I don't necessarily resonate with, and giving opportunity for people who hold a different positionality than I do to still speak to me and for me to be in dialogue with them.
Yeah, I just want to pick up a little bit on what you said, because I also feel like in my work, and that's, as an aspiring scholar, so I'm open to critique, as long as they're constructive. And what I'm noticing in my work is sometimes I get a critique from African-centered scholars that I'm not cultural enough, like I'm not cultural specific. And sometimes I also hear from the cultural universalist that I'm too cultural. I'm, just too restricted in my worldviews. So, and that is a struggle, that's a permanent struggle as a scholar. Like, what is the middle ground here? We're talking about episteme, we're talking about knowledge, right? So, how do because I also will not ignore that I'm an African, I'm black, and that is pretty much clear. So, but how do I look at the African, the cultural specificity without also missing some of the universal elements, because we all share that humanness. And that's a very African thing. Because when you say let us be African, what that means is let us be human. So that's a little bit how I'm looking at that struggle. But to directly answer your question about the whole background of those scholars in integral education, I am a hybrid. I am ontologically and phenomenologically an African living being, but I feel like I am epistemologically westernized. So, and that creates a struggle within me. I was born and raised in Cameroon in Western Africa. I came to the US 8-9 years ago, so I feel like I'm pretty much well westernized now. So, I have always lived the reality that I'm being exposed to in this school from the African perspective. But I had never stopped and think about my essence and my knowledge as an African person and what that means to the people who are like me. So what I'm trying to say, I'll try to put it simply. Coming from an oral tradition, I did not feel like it was necessary for me to study my culture, to study my knowledge, to study my people, to study my origin in a way that I put in books or articles to make an impact in academia. I just knew that was something that I was, or I am, right? So I was living that reality. But then I came to this school, and thankfully I was exposed to multiple ways of knowing, and this school called itself Integral Education, and the program called itself East-West Psychology. So the first East-West Psychology thing for me was like, East-West, what does that even mean? Because I'm not East, I'm not West. And the pedagogy, the material that I was exposed to, they require readings, books, and articles and everything. There was nothing, absolutely nothing that talked about an African perspective or a black perspective in general. Nothing. All I was taught was to master Jung, who basically represent the Western perspective of psychology, and to master the Eastern theories, of non-dual and Advaita Vedanta and all that. That is what I was asked to think about. So, and I started then thinking, and then also it goes way beyond the integral. So as I start going into studying that material, because I'm always open to learning different things, and I realized that what they call integral education here, they should call individual development or something, or individual integration or something, because I saw that it's more about how I, as a human being, develop and access different realms of being. That now means holism. I am whole because I integrate psyche, mind, and being. So I started having a problem with that because it was very individualistic, egoistic, selfish. Because, okay, I'm illuminated, so I'm the Gnostic man, I'm God. So what? So what next? So I come from a culture where the I is not I, the I is we. So, and I was thinking about what that will mean from a we, not from an I. Integration, holism. And I realized that holism from a we perspective is not integrating my own individual, that's part of it, but it's more about how do I live in harmony with people around me. with the universe. So that is what became clear to me. And that's why I wanted to contrast that with all the background, because I also wanted to put the African perspective in context. I just didn't want to come and talk about the African perspective since the topic is the African perspective on integral education. So I had to review the founder of the school, the Obindo's idea that Chowdhury, found the school on, and then the people who also talked about integrity like Wilbur, and then Holly was the prominent one now, and see how do I position myself vis-a-vis those scholars? What do I bring in the plate? And that's why I was contrasting those perspectives.
So I can answer what I think your question was, but I want to give you what I heard in your question is, what does it mean to bring yourself into your pedagogy? Is that the question? Okay, so one of the things that I want to say is that anytime we interact with another, this is from my perspective, we bring a totality of who we are. We bring our experiences. We bring the obstacles that stood in our road. We bring all the material knowledge, and we also bring whatever it is that we know of spirit. So, what I say to my students, in every class, I start with ground rules, and I start even before we talk to each other, because I think that unless we have subscribed to the same set of ground rules, we don't even know how to language our interactions and be respectful. So one of the things I say to my students is, I invite you to bring truth to this room, but I'm inviting you to bring truth with a small t rather than truth in capital letters, because for every one of us, the truth is based on our experience. And I talk about, when I was a young person living in Harlem in New York, if you went downtown, if you went out of Harlem, which was a segregated community, into downtown stores, which were predominantly white, you were followed. I was in my 30s before I understood that you had a right to walk into a store and look at things, that you didn't have to say you were going to buy something. And so I say, so when I share, that's my experience. If I am asked, what did you think about stores growing up? I will say they were unfriendly, they were targeting, etc. Someone else who had white skin privilege, who walked in those stores, would have a different experience. And that experience colors what we think of in the world. And so that what I bring to my class is always through this lens, this filter, this way of knowing. There's no way to be objective that I know of. I mean, if you want to say that you could be disembodied spirit and talk from some great universal realm, maybe, but given all the gurus who have turned out to have feet of clay and who have very messily tripped up, I have not really met such a being, in my life. So for me, it is important to bring our stories. For me, the issue of my students learn there's all the information, all the buried scholarship, all the unknown scholars of color who have been writing for the last half century. I mean, we used to say, oh, well, racism exists because they really don't know. And then we have had over a half century. And if we go back to the shoulders that the people writing in the last 50 years, we go back to their shoulders that they stood on. People of color in the US have been writing and analyzing and making new cultural and intellectual frameworks for almost as long as we have been here. Now, sometimes they didn't get out because we were enslaved, and who could we talk to? But so excavating the buried, hidden, suppressed knowledge is one thing. But I also want my students to be able to act. I feel that if my students, after a class with me, aren't more ready to stand up against injustice, aren't more ready to know and understand that no matter what the rules were for women, there were always women who broke the rules in every culture, in every society, ancient and contemporary. If we don't come out of this feeling more empowered and feeling more empowered to stand up for justice, I feel we have failed. And so for me, teaching, pedagogy is how do we empower living human beings to go out in the world? June Jordan has a wonderful piece about Black English, and she says, you know, Black English presumes that there is another living person that you are talking to and you want to communicate. That you are not into showing off that you can use 7-syllable languages, 7-syllable words. You are there to communicate and to have that person be in communication with you, and that we name what is. So she says, for example, there's no passive voice in Black English. You cannot say Black people are being destroyed. You have to say something like, white people be about destroying Black folks. Because that's the reality. That's what is lost in our generalization, that we need to have these experiences. I'm supervising a dissertation now where the student is writing about the prevalence of rape, and she says, when the website says so many millions of women, or so many thousands of women have been raped, and these are statistics that are about America, and what she says is 99% of rapists are male. And so when we make it a passive sentence, we take away holding accountable that whether men are raped, or women are raped, or children are raped, 99% of the time the perpetrators are male. And so what are we teaching them? And how do we get men to claim this? Rape is not a woman's problem any more than racism is a problem of people of color. These are problems of the dominant culture. So for me, how could I not bring in the personal? And then the last thing on this is the spiritual issue. Somewhere in the last 15 years, I realized I am here because somebody held on in slavery and prayed, stayed alive because they hoped that it's by and by, someday, it was going to be better for the children. I come from a line of women who, in spite of these horrible conditions, tried to teach about the importance of love. I'm a midwife. I was a midwife for 20 years, and I think about my enslaved ancestors who had to think, was it better to preserve the life that came forth or to kill it? I mean, so all of these issues so much inform the scholarship, and in our program, we have an exercise that all our students do called the Mother Line, in which we invite them to go back and do the oral conversations, to retrieve the histories of their motherland and bring them forth and share them. And so sharing the histories of oppression, resilience, resistance, and to share the commonalities of our oppression. And I think people feel more powerful. I mean, two things I'll just say. A student was writing to me, trying to get some incomplete reversed after 2 years, which is basically impossible. But in the middle of that conversation, she said, Arisika, I am not the same scared rabbit I was when I started CIIS. And that, to me, it's not about memorizing the names of all these people, it's what you're going to take out in the world. And then another student who was walking between Market and Mission on 10th Street at noon, so daylight, just down the street, just that corner. And she's walking down the street and a man walks up and puts his hands on her breast. Now people are seeing this. Nobody moves to help her. She started to yell at him. She started to say, how dare you? What are you doing? And he apologized. He backed off. He apologized. And what she said, I could not have done it before I took the Womanist Feminist class. And I don't know who she identified or what story touched her. That, to me, is what we want to bring to our pedagogy.
We have a few more minutes. Would anybody like to ask a question? Yes.
Yeah. First of all, I want to...
No, just can you
I'll
speak
speak
up?
loudly. I want to thank you very much for this presentation. For me, it's an introduction, and I very much appreciate it. You've taken the time presenting yourselves. It means a lot to me, and so thank you very much. I wanted to ask, in Africa, you spoke of African culture. I think your name is Arissa.
Arisika.
I'm very sorry.
No, it's fine.
You spoke of, and I'm sorry, I don't know your.
Every day.
Pardon me?
Every day.
Every day? Thank you. I think you two spoke more of African culture and the depth of African culture, the indigenous African culture. My question is whether African culture at this time, as you've spoken of it, I mean traditional African culture, is it strong? Is there a continuity? Has there been a break with colonization? Is there a rediscovery happening?
Well, yeah, you didn't mention me, but I would say absolutely. It's
Okay,
never
I'm sorry.
stopped. Yeah, no,
because
no,
you
no, it's
spoke a
fine.
little differently.
Absolutely. It's
Absolutely which, I'm sorry.
absolutely, it is a continuum. It's a living continuum. It's not Africa is not a small place, it's not a fixed place, it's not a mythical place. It is a very dynamic, alive, eternal space. And the evidence of its vitality and the continuation of it is in its existence and how it's resonating with each of us. My husband is in Dakar right now, doing at an arts biennial, and he just sent me a text message that I just showed to Ebede. The work of Senghor is very much alive, and I will tell you later, maybe one of them will talk to you about who Senghor is very much alive and present right now, today, literally as we speak. There are people painting his image on the wall and speaking about his work and his philosophy as we're sitting here on this panel. And so, yes, absolutely. There's conferences, there's scholarship. Ebede in his presentation mentioned at least 3 or 4 African scholars that Dr. Fukuyama, unfortunately, has joined the ancestors, but God bless him, he's joined the ancestors. Yeah, so, but absolutely, the philosophers and teachers, Dr. Theophile Obenga, very much alive. He's a professor emeritus from San Francisco State who's returned to the Congo, which is his home country, who's actively engaged in teaching and embracing and continuing the philosophical teachings of Africa.
And I want to say, yes, there's been colonization, there's been enforced Christianity, there's been all the attacks on the psyche and the souls, and there is this huge movement to go back and look at indigenous traditions and speak to them as the foundation. So, and there is this way that things come through into the modern world. So there we are, if you look at the movie Pray the Devil Back to Hell, which is talking about the civil war in Liberia, and talking about the peace movement in which Christian and Muslim women came together for the first time. And so there people are, there the warlords are, herded into one room, there the rebels are, and they decide they're winning. They don't need to negotiate for peace. And they say, we'll just slaughter all the people, around the capital, and then we'll go get some women from the interior and we'll repopulate. And the women involved in the peace struggle, whose daughters and children are in the capital, are outraged. And and one of the women starts to strip. And you watch this man from the Organization of African Unity start to herd the people, the rebels, back into the room. So there's this way that some of these foundations are still there, and that they come through this outer ground. And so Senghor is one of the founders of Negritude, and so this really strong claiming of African presence, this repudiation of the tropes of colonialism and Eurocentrism. So claiming, black woman, your skin's softer than fur, talking about the positive values of blackness as an aesthetic. And yes, at the same time, there are women bleaching their skin because that's how pervasive that is. So all of these are happening in a similar, I won't say the same way, that indigenous people who were put in boarding schools are excavating their roots. I mean, there is a whole generation of African intellectuals and scholars who went to Christian schools, and they were taught that everything about African traditions were wrong. And then in the 60s, again, this great rediscovery, reclaiming of roots and what it meant, and now a secondary flowering. So you'll see, yes, all different. One of the beautiful things about Africa, and some people say that it's because it is polytheistic, that its ability to integrate. So if we think about jazz, if we think about fusion, if we think about the way that you take what the colonizer gave you and you transform it and change it, all of this is happening. Everything, loss, colonialism, reclamation, re-erection, Sankofa, turning back to bring forward. All of this is happening at the same time. And so if you want to say the glass is half empty or the glass is half full, where do you want to situate yourself? I want to situate myself with the people who are striving to make it better.
I would just add, because I was going to hand everything. This is the living embodiment of what your question is sitting right here in the middle of the room. But I'm saying literally, he's from Cameroon. He's African continental born, alive right now in 2016, doing African rooted scholarship. He's sitting right here. We are too, by extension through the diaspora. But you specifically ask about the continental experience. It's right here in the middle of the room.
Yeah, and because I know we don't have enough time because I can go forever, so I'm just going to say, look forward to an article that's coming up in the International Journal of Transpersonal Studies, maybe in 2 weeks or something, I don't know.
Yeah.
Look at the article that I'm publishing in there, which is a critical African-centered psychology, from ism to praxis. The Senghor and all those people, you will hear more about them. And the things that you're talking about, I'm addressing that there, just for the sake of time.
Yeah. Thank you for your questions. Thank you all for your presence. In the spirit of sort of the tradition in place of our founders, Ramen was nice to get essences from Auroville. So these are just a gift.
Thank you.
And thank you.
This word oromer, the mère is French for mother. So it's together, it's the dual masculine, feminine.